When I was born, my father gave to me an angel horn with wings of melody. That angel placed her lips upon my fingertips, and I became her secret name. Her name grew strong, spread like a passion tree. She named the song, I played the melody. And in the morning hour I awoke to dream of her, and all day long I lived her song. In boat and barge where songs and seas are friends, our dreams grew large, made love where dreaming ends. And people placed her lips upon our fingertips, and friends became our secret name. Now light is low, new angels come and go. The passion tree spreads dense as destiny, and this old angel horn strives like a lifting dawn. Love moves to claim our secret name.
Welcome everyone. I'm Polly Patello, the publisher of Papillon Press and of Riff, the Shake Keane story by Philip Nanton. We just had a little Shake Keane magic to whet your appetite. We first heard the Shake Keane quintet playing Morning Blue from the EP In My Condition. That was followed by the track Prague 89 from the album Real Keane, Reggae into Jazz. And we heard Philip Nanton beautifully reciting Shake Keane's poem Angel Horn. Great example of how jazz and poetry can get entangled, and in this example both from the same hand. So I'm delighted to be able to host this book launch today and to welcome you all here, whether it's morning, afternoon or evening for you, wherever you are. Greetings. I'm in Dominica in the Eastern Caribbean, which is Papillon Press's second home. We are here to celebrate the launch of Riff, the biography of Shake Keane. This is in fact just a cover masquerading as Riff, as due to COVID, I haven't seen the actual book, but I'm told by those who have that it's pretty nice inside too. Thanks to designer Andy Dark, photographers including Val Wilmer, and of course to Philip Nanton's words. So to begin, I'll just quickly explain how the launch is going to unfold. We'll start with the Q&A between Philip and Robert Lee. Robert is a poet, wordsmith, literary wizard from St. Lucia, and he's kindly agreed to interrogate Philip in the gentlest possible way. This will be followed by a discussion between Kevin Le Gendre and Shake Keane's son, Roland Ramanan. We'll then introduce poet and publisher Jeremy Robson and Linton Kwesi Johnson, the poet and record producer. Both will offer their memories of Shake. Then it's back to Philip, who will read an extract from Riff, in fact, from the opening chapter in which he meets Shake in a bar in Kingstown, St. Vincent. This will be followed by a reading from Lafleur Cockburn, who is also from St. Vincent, and she will read from the poetry collection One a Week with Water. And our launch will end with Philip's reading of the poem Prudential. Then we will take questions from all comers. Come the end, or indeed throughout the launch, we hope you'll raise a glass of your own chosen tipple to Shake Keane and, of course, his biographer, Philip Nanton. Just to say something about Philip for those who don't know about his life and times, he was born and raised in St. Vincent, then went to England and spent time studying and then teaching at Birmingham University. He returned to the Caribbean about 20 years ago and lives in Barbados. But apart from his academic work, I think people will know him most as a great spoken word performer. His two books with Papillot Press. The first one was Island Voices from St. Christopher and the Barracudas, and then Canoe Suite and Other Pieces. Both exemplify his remarkable skill as a poet. His most recent book, something completely different, is Frontiers of the Caribbean, an analysis of the region as frontier societies in the post-colonial period. And now here is Riff, biography of the groundbreaking jazz musician and award-winning poet. Shake Keane was born in St. Vincent in 1927 and died in Norway in 1997. What happened between those dates is something we will celebrate and explore today. So now I'd like to hand you over to Robert Lee and author Philip Nanton.
And thank you, Polly and Philip, for inviting me to be part of your launch. It's wonderful to see so many friends here. LKJ Linton, Kwesi, Ken Corsby, Jean Lawrence, and many others, too many to mention now, but it's great to be with all of you this afternoon. Now I'm going to ask Philip some questions, sort of a friendly interview type about Riff, which I've been reading. So Polly, I do have my personal copy in hand, and it's a great read and very fascinating. I was fortunate to know Shake. I actually stayed in his house with him in 1976. Oren Bully of Dominica had taken a play to St. Vincent, took me along with his cast, and I stayed with Shake, and the conversation and friendship was really great, and we got to meet each other a couple of times later. So it's a pleasure to have this opportunity to read his book and to talk about it. So now, Philip, are you coming on screen with me? Are you hearing me, Philip? Great. Okay.
I'm hearing you, but I'm not.
I see you now. Okay, great. With your hat.
Right.
Okay.
Good.
What inspired? Okay, right, Philip. What inspired you to write this biography of Shake Keane? And by the way, is it the first biography of Shake, as far as you know?
As far as I know, yes, it is. It's the first biography.
Okay. What
inspired me? Well, first of all, it's a good story.
Yes.
It's a story that has a very clear arc, and it's also, it starts in St. Vincent. It moves to England, Europe, the US, New York, Norway, also with a period back in St. Vincent. And also the life, it's a story, it's an up and down story, a life. There's great highs and there's also great lows, which is another important feature of this story, I think.
Right.
And other kind of reasons also is that there are not many Caribbean artists who really achieve in two genres like Shake has done, and certainly that not many that I know of between who are so accomplished jazz musicians mixing poetry at the level at which he did that, and that was another important reason.
Right. You're also Vincentian. Was that probably somewhere in your mind a little connection that you shared a home island, perhaps?
Yeah, well, degree? I mean, I got to know Shake in '79 when we happened to be in St. Vincent together.
Yes.
But of course, at that time, and it's only for a long time, I had no intention. I didn't think I was going to be doing anything like that. I mean, I was certainly interested in his poetry, and so I had written a little bit about his writing because it had captivated me. More than that, we had shared some time together, and he talked to me about poetry, which was very, very helpful and very influential. And so that, there's a personal side to the story, certainly.
Wonderful.
And then also, there's an important feature is the fact that his story has a lot of common Caribbean elements to it. You know, the migration, the call of sense of national wanting to contribute to the island.
Yes, right.
And on return, of course, the pained relationship that he had with the island as well as another factor.
Okay.
And
You do. Oh,
but
sorry. Yes.
one other thing is also that you have this contradiction
Mm-hmm.
also with his return, and you know, a person who has achieved internationally, and in the island you have this tension between a pride in a person's achievement and a person who turned out to be really not that wanted when he returned. And it reminds me of the situation when, you know, the person who is away sends back money, usually to build their house. And when they come back, you know, there's no house.
No house, money got used up, right?
Rather you stay away rather than come back. So all of those elements go towards saying, yeah, this is a story that I could get my teeth into.
Okay, you mentioned three major influences in Shake's life and work, which also played a part in the lives and work of his artistic contemporaries. Some you've just touched on. The rise of nationalism in the Caribbean from the 30s, and Shake was born 1927, I think, if I recall right. Yeah. The experience of migration, the Windrush, for example, generation, when so many of Shake's generation moved to UK, and Shake himself, of course, in 1952, went to the UK. But you also mentioned something I thought interesting, the views of and practice of masculinity. So there's nationalism, there's migration, but you dig a bit more deeply into masculinity. How are the issues of masculinity manifest in the music, poetry, and life of Shake Keane, taking also the migration, the nationalism, but there's the man. And today we live in a time in our world when sort of the whole gender thing and the maleness, the femaleness, a lot of issues are discussed deeply in the realm of literature. But for Shake, what about this area of masculinity, which you touch on, and you do touch on throughout the book at certain points?
Sure. Well, Robert, thank you. That is like bowling me a googly, you realize. In the sense that you talk about, you want me to talk about the influence of masculinity. But I think I have to kind of take a step back from that. In the sense that the idea of masculinity, it's looking at influences. It's more like I use masculinity, migration, nationalism as what I would call social frames with which I view his life. Because well, masculinity itself is, of course, a kind of learned behavior. And that is a separate issue from, you know, the music and poetry, you know, which are very much concerned with emotions. Of course, yeah, both of them are concerned with performance, but they obviously, it's different kinds of performance that we're talking about. But certainly, so in terms of the social elements, you know, and masculinity in Caribbean terms, you have what I would call traditional male West Indian behavior. Right. He was very much one of the boys. There's obviously a degree of serial dependence on his three wives. The fact that he was also an absent father. These are all fairly common Caribbean male behaviors. Then, of course, in terms of the jazz environment, and certainly in the 60s, jazz was very much a male activity, and particularly the trumpet. The trumpet was very much, was often seen as a male domain as well. I mean, obviously that hasn't continued, but in those days it certainly was, you know. Yes. So you have that aspect, and then with the jazz, you have the late nights, you have the alcohol, you have the bars. So all of these things are the conventional associations. But I think that the issue of music and the issue of poetry, because these are emotions, I would say that we're in danger of comparing apples and pears here, and I would say that looking at that there are very different ways of looking at the issue.
Okay. How did the musicianship, and in particular, Shake's interests in working with the Joe Harriet Quintet of freeform jazz shape the poetry? You suggest, and I quote you, he often applies what could be called a jazz rule-breaking style, I guess improvisational style, to the composition of poetry. How is that seen when we read his poetry today? Are there parallels I've often thought, Shake, with Kamau Brathwaite? I've often seen him as a precursor to Kamau. Kamau Brathwaite, of course, there's Linton Kwesi, who's with us today, and his own nation language formulations, even Kamau's typographical and sound experiments. In what ways do you see Shake's jazz musicianship impacting on the poetry that he wrote, that he did?
I would say in two ways. Generally, one is certainly in terms of improvisation.
Yes.
And when I mean improvisation, I mean in terms of its impact on the poetry, the improvisation, for example, the way in which he would use a page, the way in which he would actually simply, where he would place words on a page, where certain words are sometimes placed almost like notes, and they'd be dotted around the page in a different way.
Right. One a week with water, yeah.
With One a Week with Water, you have that.
You see that a lot, yes.
Very clearly. Another aspect of that is also his call and response, which actually operate on the page. You will have one voice on one side of the page, another voice on the other side, and that operates with very much in One a Week as well. And in a lot of his poetry, he will do that.
Right.
And as I say, also the words are kind of like sometimes just like notes. So he plays with. He talks. In One a Week, he has words that he invents. He puts words. He makes notes at the bottom of the page often, where he talks about words, and he talks. He has an interesting statement. He talks about a village in St. Vincent that's spelled B-U-M, and it's a village in St. Vincent. But he says it's difficult to say how to pronounce it, but he doesn't actually. He never tells us how to pronounce it. So there's also an element of playing with the reader as well in that sense. And
he used a lot of Vincentian, just like in nation language, Brathwaite and others today, and LKJ. He used Vincentian language, nation language, as it were, in there too.
Yeah, absolutely.
It wasn't straight standard English, yes.
Absolutely, yeah, certainly. He uses works like edge up, jokify, things like that, which have.
But let me just jump in because.
But the other.
Okay, go on. Before I don't want to run out of time on us. Polly will soon need us to move on. Let me drop a question. Will you consider Shake a pioneer of Caribbean literature among his contemporaries? How would you also place the work of his Vincentian friends Danny Williams, Owen Campbell, alongside that of Shake in the wider context of the burgeoning Caribbean poetry of the time? These guys are at the beginning, as it were, in the 50s, the early 60s, when Caribbean literature is beginning to find its way out into international attention. A couple of days ago, Monique Roffey just won a big prize, and Caribbean writers are winning big prize everywhere. But Shake and these guys were at the very beginning. Would you see Shake as a pioneer who needs more recognition now at this stage?
Well, in a way, yes, I would say. In the sense that it's been there are good reasons why he hasn't been recognized, because the work has not always been easily available. So that's just a practical issue. So, for instance, when he won the Casa Las Americas Prize in '79, only a few hundred copies were ever published, and so so awareness of his work was limited. You have to recognize that.
Yes.
But at the same time, in terms of as a writer like Campbell and
Danny Williams,
I would say that his style moved and developed tremendously, and I moved away from those interests and the sort of, the very local
traditional
interest.
Yes. Right.
the interesting thing you mentioned, Kamal, and I think that, of course, the important difference is that Kamal listened to music, Shake played music, and I think that's
right.
a
Good
fundamental
point.
difference that you have to recognize.
Excellent
So
point.
the personal, the relationship with the music is, in a sense, a very different kind of relationship. In a sense, perhaps a more personal kind of relationship, and I think that's quite important. His contribution also, I would say, is in what I would call, there's his attitude to writing poetry. It had to be joyful and it had to be exuberant. And that was very much his concern. I just wanted to just give some very quick illustrations of that. So for
once
instance,
you're through, we'll go back. Once you're through, we'll go back to Polly, and I'm sure we'll be able to talk more with others later, more on this. But go on, read your piece. Kwesi.
At the beginning of One a Week with Water, the first page,
yes. Right.
What does it say? It has about 5 or 6 words, the whole page. In the Caribbean Sea, I weep, and then at the very bottom it says cordially.
Yes. Yes, I have it. I have it right
then
there.
There's he also plays it's a very light-hearted approach, though I mean serious at the same time, but it's light-hearted. So he gives this nonsense piece at a certain stage. It says, if you take the amount of strong rum calculated in proof gallons consumed in any given month of Sundays, compare it with the excise duty assessed as percentage over and above the actual value of the liquor, then divide this amount by the energy required to deface any number of domino dots by slamming over a period of, say, 1 month of Sundays. And if this entire calculation is undertaken between 9 and 11:30 in the forenoon of any Sunday and expressed in terms of foot-pounds recurring, chances are you are a genius, and your wife is probably wondering what on earth you and the boys could be up to this sunny Sunday morning.
Lovely.
And then he has this lovely folk prayer that he gives to this person. And another week in One a Week with Water, which goes, O Son of Man, O God, who bringest down woe and mighty hard redemption through thy Lord, our Son, suffer us not to pass through the valley of Golgotha, for we are as a chaff upon thy wind, a cornerstone in this thy city of sin. Oh God, brethren, wasn't that a fantastic prayer I just prayed, eh? Speak your mind, brethren.
Okay, thank you, Philip. That's good. I'm sure I'm sure when we get a discussion with others, I'm sure you'll come back in again and develop these ideas some more. Let's hand over to Polly now, because we have some other people to bring on. So thanks, Philip, for this, and we're going to chat some more. Polly, all over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. Am I there? Am I on?
Yes.
Philip, are you going to introduce October Woman now?
Yes, sure.
Okay, great.
So we thought it would be good to have mix in with the chat some powerful music, and I'd like to we should have a snatch of October Woman, which was released in 1965 by Michael Garrett, the quintet, and it featured Joe Harriott and Shake, Coleridge Good on bass, Michael Garrick on piano, Colin Barnes on drums, and it was released in 1965, October Woman.
Thank you. Okay. Am I back in the land of the Zoom? Thank you very much, Robert and Philip, for, as Philip described, Shake's poetry your encounter was joyful and exuberant. Thank you so much. And of course, full of rich textual exchanges and references. So next part of our launch, I'm delighted to be able to introduce Roland Ramanan, who, as I said before, is importantly for this event, the son of Shake Keane. But he is also a teacher, a musician. He plays trumpet, specializing improvised music, and also a photographer. He's based in London. And he will be talking with UK journalist and broadcaster Kevin Le Gendre. Thank you so much for being part of this, whose latest book is Hear My Train A-Coming, the songs of Jimi Hendrix. So over to you, Kevin and Roland.
Thanks, Polly.
Thanks, Polly. Roland, we've already heard some very important discussion about the duality of Shake Keane, the coexistence of the excellent musicianship and the poetry. Can we just start by expanding on that a little bit, talking about a possible relationship between the two, or how he himself kind of managed these two quite extraordinary skills?
I think it's an interesting question, Kevin, and that has been said, he excelled in both. Although I think when he came over to London and his jazz career kind of took off, he wasn't necessarily that involved in the poetry scene in London, and as Philip has highlighted, it kind of wasn't his most fertile period in terms of writing poetry. But I think from what's been said and heard already, I think the two things come from a common source. So that sense of playfulness and adventure in his music comes from the same source as that kind of playfulness and adventurousness in his poetry as well. I'm not sure I necessarily subscribe to the idea of jazz poetry. I think that the two things are quite different disciplines, but I do think they stem from perhaps his Caribbean origins and a kind of oral tradition. One thing that hasn't been mentioned is I've seen Shake live when he came back to London with doing concerts with Michael Garrick, spinning yarns and kind of improvising orally, telling stories, making up songs on the spot, and he could do that incredibly fluently. I'm sure kind of Linton would attest to this. He had an amazing talent for doing that. So I think where that comes from, where that flows from, is something which feeds his poetry, but also feeds the music as well. So that they come from a kind of common source, I think.
So an ability as a storyteller, I mean, it's one of the things that many great improvising musicians put the onus on, whether you're composing or improvising. I mean, Wayne Shorter in particular has made a real case for the necessity for musicians, especially when they're soloing, to be able to tell a story and to build a narrative arc. And I think certainly when you listen to him play, you do have that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, his musical personality comes through. I mean, you heard a very brief excerpt of October Woman, and you can see all the nuances and the subtleties that he puts into the melody. It's all there. One of my favorite records of Shake is quite a commercial record. He's playing with a big band orchestra, with the Johnny Keating Orchestra. He's playing he's playing standards like Baby It's Cold Outside and Making Whoopee and things like this, and they're quite commercial arrangements, but it's one of my favorite records of his because his musical personality comes through, that kind of puckishness and sort of wouldn't say, well, kind of, kind of fire and contained aggression, but always playful, always humorous, and so musical as well. I mean, we were talking before about, what were his influences as a jazz musician, and who does he sound like? And he doesn't really sound like anyone in terms of being a jazz trumpet player. I was thinking about this a lot, but when we heard Morning Blue, which is the first music that we heard, he actually sounds a lot like Joe Harriott. And I think when he came to London, certainly on the trumpet, he learned a lot from Joe in terms of his attack, for the music. You can really hear them kind of sparking off each other. But on the flugelhorn, he's entirely his own man. He's completely unmistakable. Not necessarily a technical innovator, but certainly someone with his own, very musical approach that kind of stands out.
Yeah, we'll come back to the question of repertoire, because I have a few observations about just the wide range of music that he played. But while you mentioned the flugelhorn, Roland, I think that's very important, because not every trumpeter plays the flugelhorn as well. It's another instrument. I mean, we might think of people like Freddie Hubbard or Art Farmer who played both, but the flugelhorn is it's another beast. So can you, from your point of view as a trumpeter, can you tell us a bit more about the challenges of playing a flugelhorn and how you think he developed his own sound on it?
Well, I'm very aware that I'm in the presence of other trumpet players. So there's people like Byron Wallen on the call, who know a lot more about it than me. Let's just say that I have never played the flugelhorn, precisely for the reason that it is another instrument.
Yeah.
Now I know that the flugelhorn mouthpiece is different to the trumpet. It requires a different embouchure. So, some jazz trumpet players got around this by essentially using, their trumpet mouthpiece on the flugelhorn, and they can kind of get away with it that way. But I know that Shake came to his own accommodation, with that, so that he could get the true flugel sound. And I remember, he actually said this to me himself. Not many trumpet players get the true flugel sound on the flugelhorn, but he did. And I understand that the flugelhorn made for him, kind of specially. So that is something that he found his own voice on. But it is difficult to to maintain those two instruments with two different embouchures to such a high level. So that was pretty extraordinary.
Great. Let's go back to the question of repertoire. So you mentioned the album that I think he did a couple of albums with the Keating sound, where he's doing those tunes like Making Whoopee and other standards. I really like some of his quote unquote commercial stuff. Like there's an album that he did, which I think one of the titles is Soul. It was issued a couple of times, and he's doing R&B and pop stuff. There's an absolutely killing version of Booker T and the MG's Green Onions, among other things. I think he's doing Don Covey tunes as well. It's like proper soul music. In his own inimitable fashion. But then he also, if we look at the depth and the breadth of his career, he played with African musicians in London where they were developing what was termed high life calypso. And then you think about the work with Michael Garrick, which is very lyrical, very, very poetic, more experimental work that he did, obviously the Harriott Quintet. The point I'm making is that the range of his output is extremely wide. Stylistically, he wasn't limited in any way.
I think that was quite unusual back then for a musician to be able to fit into so many musical contexts. So he was skilled at playing in the discipline needed for a big band. He played on a record playing very difficult 12-tone music, soul music, as you say, calypso. And he could do all that. I don't know whether, in terms of career-wise, sometimes people who are adept at fitting into lots of different situations don't have the success that they deserve in a way, because they may be perceived as a jack of all trades. That I don't know. I don't know whether that's something that counted against him. I don't know, but it certainly meant that he could take work opportunities when they came up, and adapt very, very quickly. That's true.
We don't have that much time, Roland. Maybe we could round off by talking a bit about the very important question of prevailing race relations or racial discrimination in the music industry at that time, the challenges faced by Black musicians, especially Black musicians who were pushing the envelope stylistically and doing quote unquote difficult music, like Joe and Shake and people like Dizzy Reese as well. Given the fact that you have a certain insight, can you share a few things with us? No.
Well, I mean, I know that the same as for many musicians of his generation in London, in the UK, racism dogged him at every step. And it's no secret that other lesser musicians would get jobs, and he wouldn't. And when the opportunity came up to play in Germany, it was a 3-year contract. It was something which he couldn't turn down. So you have to ask yourself how Britain couldn't sustain two of its greatest players, Joe Harriott and Shake Keane, how they were not able to be sustained in their careers. So I think there was kind of overt racism that you face when you're trying to find a flat and you can't. And I think there's a very more kind of subtle racism, which is probably not even recognized by the people who perpetrate it, who are able to, on the one hand, love Sonny Rollins or Sarah Vaughan or whoever it is who's visiting from the States, but may have a kind of a blind spot that they don't realize about Black musicians who are from the Caribbean. And I think that is certainly a factor that made it hard for a lot of Black musicians at the time.
What do you think his greatest legacy is, Roland?
I think he contributes to a story, and we're really aware now of the contribution of people from all over the globe who are Black and made a contribution to to culture and music in the UK certainly, and obviously back in the Caribbean. So his legacy is he forms an interesting and fascinating and vibrant and joyful part of that story, of that continuing story, and it's something which younger musicians and younger Black musicians are picking up on, and that is wonderful.
Right. Roland, a pleasure to talk to you.
And you.
Kevin and Roland, thanks very much for that very, very, very useful opening up on the background, on the music, the situation, the social situation that Shake found himself in. And I think it's very much just the beginning of the discussion of these issues. But I'd wish to move on now. And the next contributor, the person we asked to contribute, is Jeremy Robson, who was very, very active, in fact, started the ball rolling really in many ways in the world of jazz and poetry in the 60s in England. And I've asked Jeremy to come along and say a few words, but before I go over to him, I'd just like to do a short introduction. For those who don't know Jeremy Robson, he is both a much published poet and an independent publisher. He recently published his autobiography, Undercover, A Poet's Life in Publishing. His latest book is The Heartless Traffic, New and Selected Poems. More important for this evening, he was and has remained the force behind the director of hundreds of poetry and jazz concerts that sprung to life in the 60s around the British Isles. Shake appeared in many of these early concerts. So I've asked Jeremy to reflect on those early days of jazz and poetry events that involve Shake and his music. Jeremy, over to you.
Thank you very much. It was in February 1961 that Shake first came into the poetry and jazz orbit. You see him there here with with Michael Garrick. That was taken at the first poetry jazz concert that Shake took part in at the Belgrade Theatre in Coventry. The concerts which I arranged and took part in a lot started actually at the Hampstead Town Hall, a very rough and ready affair which amazed us all when hundreds of people were turned away. And we followed up with a concert at the Royal Festival Hall, and that too was sold out. And the Daily Mail actually wrote saying, 3,000 people went to listen to poetry. And I call that a piece of history. So that encouraged us to go on. And it was after that second concert at the Festival Hall that I met Michael Garrick. He'd actually put on a program of his own of music and voices. He was using actors. We only ever use poets reading their own poems. I went up to Michael and we talked, and he said, I'd like to set some of your poems, and he did. So that's how we got going. It was a kind of a natural marriage in that sense. I was young, I was reviewing poetry, I was enthusiastic about poetry, and I wanted to spread it as widely as I could. And I was also a passionate jazz fan, so the two were very natural to go together. At the Coventry concert that Shake took part in, it was a quartet. It was Shake and Michael Garrick's trio. There were 3, 4 poets, myself, and Spike Milligan came along to end the concert. There's a picture of him here, and you can see that Shake is sitting at the back, I think looking amused, maybe looking bemused. But they got on like a house on fire because, of course, Spike had played the trumpet in an army band. So he was a passionate admirer of Shake's, and just from time to time, he came and read with us. At that theatre, in the audience was a famous dramatist, Arnold Wesker. And Arnold was actually in the process of organizing 12 festivals together with the trades union movement in different towns. And he came backstage and he asked me whether I would organize concerts for all those festivals. So that was 12 festivals, and that really got us going. And once Joe Harriott joined, and very often Coleridge Good on bass or Jeff Klein on bass, both amazing bass players. The music was, as you can imagine, absolutely sensational. He was a powerful and benevolent figure, and he commanded the stage that day, as he always did whenever he appeared with us. And that, of course, went back to his university days. I know my good friend Anthony Harkavy led a Cambridge band at the inter-university jazz competition in, I think, 1958. And he said that all the bands of the universities were good. He thought his band was good, but when Shake got up and played, there was no contest. He just blew everybody out of the water, and it was totally clear that he was just exceptional. I was lucky to have actually made a few records with Shake, with Joe, and with Michael Garrick. This was the first one, which I can hold up. I don't know whether it can be seen. You'd have to remove Spike Milligan, I think. Rather pretty girl on the cover, upside down. She actually came up to me at a Joe and Shake concert and said, "I'm the girl on the cover." And all I could say is, "I can't recognize you that way up." On that record, apart from the settings of poems of mine by Michael, which are always very sensitive and beautiful, there's an exception, because I wrote poem one blues day, blues night, when I was feeling blue, I sat down and I put on a Miles Davis record and wrote a poem to the track of his famous kind of blue record, to the blue and green track. And on the record, Shake is playing that piece, which was quite challenging because it's such a famous Miles Davis piece. But I think Miles would have applauded. It was quite magnificent, his playing. And whenever I play that poem back in my head, I hear Shake's beautiful tone, the melancholy and the sensitivity behind the poems. It was extraordinary. We had great fun. Shake was always very cooperative, and he liked to rehearse. He liked to get things perfect. I think number 3, I think we got a photograph of Shake rehearsing with Joe. Perhaps we have. There we are. Shake, obviously, Joe Harriet, and me back scribbling there. Shake clearly making a suggestion, which he often did, and I was always very glad to have them. We had amusing times. One of the most amusing was when I got a phone call from an Italian film director who said he was making a film called Young Europe, and he wanted to record some poetry and jazz, and would we perform? So we said we would, but what he didn't say was, and what became clear, was that it was to be in the open air on a Sunday morning at the side of the Old Vic Theatre. It was raining, it was windy, but we all turned up. There we are, Shake and Joe both wearing overcoats, and Michael playing an upright piano against the wall of the theatre in a duffel coat, I think. As far as I was concerned, that was the nearest I ever got to the Old Vic. Then there was an occasion when we were invited to a stately home called Hintlesham Hall, and there were very low chandeliers, and every time Shake hit a high note, I could see everybody wincing at the thought that they may come crashing down. And when he stood up to play a solo, his head more or less sent them flying, and everybody was at the edge of their seats. There was another occasion in Wales, a date none of us would ever forget, because in the pub before the concert, word went round that President Kennedy had been shot. Nobody could quite understand it, nobody could quite believe it. But the theatre manager didn't know what to do. He didn't know whether to call off the concert or whatever. So he decided that we should all go on stage, observe a minute's silence, and then get on with the concert. And Shake agreed instantly and led us all onto the stage. In the morning of that concert, the rehearsal, one of the poets taking part was Laurie Lee. I don't know whether he's known to you all, but he's very famous in England. He wrote a book called Cider with Rosie, which everybody reads at school. And he turned up with a violin, and he started playing a jazz number on the stage. Not a jazz number, but a popular number called Dinah. Dinah, is there anyone finer in the state of Carolina? And Shake looked round, he saw that the bass player, Jeff Klein, had left his bass lying on the floor, and he started to accompany him. I didn't know Shake could play the bass. I don't know if anybody else did, but he certainly did that day. There were some numbers that Shake always soloed on at these concerts. One was called She's Like a Swallow, which he played it's a beautiful, slow, lyrical piece of music. And of course he played it superbly. And he always played it before Laurie Lee read his own lyrical poems as a kind of an introduction. And it became something that we always did, just as he always played a composition of Michael Garrick's, equally beautiful, called Wedding Hymn, before a poem by the poet Danny Apsey, which he always read, called Epithalamium. So that was quite wonderful. Because he'd studied English literature and because he wrote poems, although he kept that very quiet at the time. And whenever we kind of mooted the possibility that he might read one, he said he was there as a musician, and we had to respect that. But he had a great affinity with the poets, and he enjoyed the bonhomie before and after the concerts, and very often during the concert, because when Shake smiled or laughed on stage, the whole audience would start to laugh. So he was a fantastic catalyst. Anyway, as far as I was concerned, it was a privilege to share a stage with him.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you very much. Happy to answer any questions at some point if anybody wants to.
We'll pick up questions towards the end, I think, and as they come in. Thanks very much for that contribution and for painting that really interesting and lovely picture of that period of jazz and poetry in England in the 60s. So now I'd like to turn to Linton Kwesi Johnson. But I'm not quite sure how one introduces someone that official British culture now calls a living legend. But Linton has received wide recognition, both academic and literary, for his revolutionary poetry and his songs of resistance. For the wider audience here, Linton's collections of poetry spans from Voices of the Living Dead in '74, Dread, Beat and Blood in '75, to My Revolutionary Friend, selected poems in 2006, produced by Penguin Modern Classics. And among his many awards, of course, are the Order of Distinction in Jamaica, and most recently, the 2020 Penn Pinter Prize for work of outstanding literary merit. Equally important, though perhaps less recognized, I should mention that he has run for many years his own record label, LKJ Records. And this medium has enabled him to support and promote without fuss many Black British artists, Shake among them. So as a good friend of Shake in his later years, I requested that Linton might say a few words about his friendship with the man himself, Shake Keane. Linton, over to you.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. I'm not going to be able to stay very long, so I'll be brief. It was a privilege to know Shake. I found him an immensely likable person, very good humored. I first came across Shake Keane in 1970 something. I can't remember the year. It may have been an event organized by the Caribbean Artist Movement, or what was left of the Caribbean Artist Movement, organized by John LaRose and Andrew Salke. It was at the Keskedi Center in North London. And he was reading Nancy Torrey. And I was just so taken in with him. You know, this huge guy with the beard and everything, reciting a poem in a Caribbean voice. Back in those days, I just started out writing, trying to find my own Jamaican voice, and to hear this man from St. Vincent with this Nancy Torrey poem, you know, I was just enthralled. But I think I knew, in those days, I think I knew Christine, or how do you say her name? Christine, I call her Christine. His wife, Christine, better, because I used to visit the library at the Institute, the Commonwealth Institute, and she took a liking to me and was very encouraging and all of that. You know, a few years later, after I'd become well known and was in the papers and on the TV and all of that, I met Christine somewhere and she said, Linton, you're not half as good a poet as Shake is. Shake was a real poet. You're not half as good as he is. You know, that was Christine anyway. Let me say a bit about visiting Shake in New York. I think I was on tour in America with the Dennis Bovell dub band, and our last gig was in New York. We were playing SOBs or one of them clubs. And I'd been in touch with Shake. I think we corresponded. And so I was invited. He invited me to come and see him up in New York. And when I went to where he was living, I was very surprised to see how modest his accommodation was. He was living in like a one-room apartment in this house. And well, we had a nice time. He cooked some curry goat for me. He's a very, very good cook. He was a very good cook. And we talked and things. And I didn't know much about Shake's music. I knew of his reputation as a musician. And I knew it worked with Joe Harriet. And, you know, all my friends who were into jazz talked about this free-form jazz that Shake and Joe were doing around the same time as Ornette Coleman in America. I didn't even know what free-form jazz was. I thought it was, you know, like avant-garde stuff, but later on discovered that it was very structured. I don't know why it's called free-form jazz. Anyway, Shake was coming to London. I got wind of it. And I had these rhythm tracks that Dennis Bovell and I had been working on. And it was pure opportunism on my part. Because, you know, I just thought, wow, having somebody like Shake Keane playing on one of my records, you know, that would be wonderful. Because I'd heard Shake play in Barbados when I was making this TV documentary under the directorship of Anthony Wall for the Arena program, and you know, we decided to film Shake, and I remember Shake reciting something from the Volcano Suite, and he was by the sea, and it was a beautiful, evocative moment, and he was playing his flugelhorn, and the tone was just magical. And I remember him, the line from the poem, he said, lately my cigarettes have been tasting of sulfur, I told her. I think it's a line from the Volcano Suite. Anyway, Shake came to London. Anthony Wall got wind of it. We decided to do a documentary about Shake. So I was, you know, spending some time with him. And we decided to put on a concert at the Ritzy Theatre in Brixton. And some Guyanese guy named something Hall, he was, he taught him a music teacher who is the first Black man I ever heard spoke with such a plummy Oxford accent. Between the sound check and the gig, this guy took Shake away. But so by the time we got back to the Ritzy, Shake was almost drunk. Anyway, we got through the concert and it was filmed for the BBC. The day I went to pick up Shake to do the recording for Real Keen Reggae into Jazz, he was staying by Coleridge Goody's house in Ladbroke Grove. And Shake, when I got there, Shake hadn't quite gotten up yet, and so I had to wait for him. And he had his shower or whatever and got dressed, and he said, give me a moment, Linton, let me have some breakfast. And his breakfast was a can of Guinness and one of those long Moray cigarettes that he smoked. We had a great time with the recording. Every single track was just one take. You know, we just played the rhythm tracks that we had and he just blew. And halfway through the session, he said to me, I have a poem I'd like to do to this particular track, Linton. And that was the poem Credentials. It was a privilege to know Shake, and I will always remember him.
Thank you very much, Linton, for those fascinating.
A bit rambling, but nevertheless.
No, I'm very, very appreciative of that you were able to have that time, and it sounded really, really fascinating. How do you see his? We've been talking a bit about his poetry earlier. How do you see his poetry and in the context of nowadays?
Well, I don't know about that. I'm not a literary critic or anything like that, but I would like to say that Shake was one of those poets who gave me the confidence to write Jamaican poetry. Having seen, having heard him read Nancy Torrey and reading other poems of his that I had come across, I think he's made a significant contribution to Caribbean literature, and he's one of my poetic heroes.
I would say I would agree with you, because in the case of the first collection I did, Island Voices, owes very much to his humor, his sense of timing, all of those things. I remember when we met once, I showed him something I'd written, and he immediately took a pen out and started putting words in different parts of the page, moving things around, putting arrows here, arrows there. By the time it finished, it looked more like a jigsaw puzzle, but he had improved it most definitely. And I mean,
I think one of the things that came over in his poetry was his peculiar, idiosyncratic, maybe is the right word, wit.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Yes. And there's no shortage of it in One a Week with Water. Certainly.
Yes.
It's just wonderful. And it just rolls and rolls and rolls. I loved it. I love it. Yeah. So so that there's also an element of debt, I guess, that I'm trying to fulfill as well in doing the book, I have to say.
Thank you very much for doing the book, because there's so much there that I didn't know about Shake. He came to England in 1952. That was the year I was born. So I didn't know, there was a lot of things there that I didn't know about Shake. What I find extraordinary was the fact that he was a poet and was doing all these poetry and music gigs without he himself performing his poetry.
Yes, that's true. My impression was that, I mean, he did speak about that, and David Austin, who did an interview with him in New York, asked him, and he said that he kept them separate. He actually said he saw it like that. And I'm surprised in a way, so when he did Credential, because he obviously decided at some stage to bring the two together for that particular poem.
And I think it worked. It worked very well.
Absolutely. It's a very
one of my favorite off of the album.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. Well, I don't want to hold you up any longer. I'm grateful. Thank you for taking the time to come over and chatting with us about Shake and your reminiscences of him.
Good luck with the book.
Thank you, Linton.
Yes.
So what I would like to do is now move on, and it's my job to actually say something, to read something. So this next section, I'm going to be joined by Lafleur Cockburn from St. Vincent, and between the three of us, we're going to try and mash up a few lines. And what I will do is, seeing as I haven't actually read anything from the book yet, I thought I should read something from the book, and so that I don't have to give any long drawn out explanation. I will just start from the chapter 1, line 1, so that to give a picture of my meeting, one of my meetings with Shake. This is set in St. Vincent. And it goes like this. Oh, and the chapter is called V's Snackette. Shake Keane was back home in St. Vincent working as a teacher when I first met him in 1979. In his lunch hour, we would occasionally retreat to the quiet of V's Snackette, a tiny bar on the corner of busy Bay and James Street in the island's capital, Kingstown. The bar, surrounded by shops and government offices, was close to the school where Shake was then teaching. The entire corner block is now a bright but ugly KFC franchise. These had only 2 windows, one looking out onto each congested street. Smaller than a one-car garage, the bar was a simple room with a garish melamine-coated counter and 3 high wooden stools. We were the only customers. Miss V, a sturdy, no-nonsense lady, would put out a petty-quart bottle of rum and a small bowl of ice for me. Shake's lunch comprised 3 bottles of Guinness. She would then leave us alone as she scurried around in a back room. We exchanged returning gossip about life in England of the 60s and the effect of coming back to St. Vincent. By this time, Shake was skeptical about his return. He had abandoned his flourishing jazz career in Europe and lost out to political maneuvering in St. Vincent over the post he most wanted and had returned to implement: Director of Culture for St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Sacked from this job after 2 years and with no other source of income, he felt compelled to accept the first vacant post and became principal of Bishop's College, a grand name for a small secondary school in Georgetown, the island's second town in the northern Windward district. It seems that even in the relative tranquility of teaching, disaster lurked. At one of our meetings, he described almost losing his life when one evening during his time as principal, he went to turn on an electric lamp and was hurled across his office. Faulty wiring. Shake was by then in his early 50s, tall and broad, around 6'4", somewhat shaggy in appearance. His size was emphasized by his characteristic loose-fitting clothing above brown lattice leather sandals. By this time, he had a luxuriant gray beard and a thinning head of hair. He moved slowly when the pain of gout struck. A large pair of spectacles rested on his nose below heavy gray eyebrows. Between his long, delicate fingers, he invariably held a roll-up cigarette. He spoke in a deep baritone voice. This apparently fierce demeanor was softened in conversation by an unassuming smile that came quick and easily. These Snackette looked directly onto the street. Passers-by would see him there and hail the famous musician and returned fellow Vincentian. A celebrated figure in the island, he was used to this public show of interest and would often be stopped in the street. A brief chat was a public sign of connection to a man of international stardom. One lunchtime, a young stevedore, hot and sweaty from the nearby docks, entered the bar. Mr. Keane, Mr. Keane. Excuse me, sir, I have one, sir. Don't mind the clothes all ragga, sir. I just off the jetty. You can hear me, sir? This one gonna be good. It goes so. I was liming on the block with the boys from the rum shop. Is then a bounce of Big Mary, them days she friending Big Nancy. Okay, pal, enough. It have plenty more verses, sir. You like how it going? You could help me fix it up sweet, sweet? Put a little chorus? Get recording contract and thing? Or even a little drink then, sir? Me throat dry. Shake, bought him the drink. So I'd like to move on and ask Lafleur Cockburn, who is a Vincentian writer, if she would read a passage from One a Week with Water. Lafleur.
Okay, thank you. Philip. This is a monologue by a character named Faustina. Mr. Keane? It's me, Faustina. I thought it was you over the road there. The sun can't agree with my eyes. Well, bless my ears. 20 years now I hearing about you, sir. And so 1976 bring you back for good? 1973? So where you was all this time? Germany? Only the last 7 years? Well, I just be home all the time looking after my husband, you know. Hardly knows the German happening these days. That country don't take me spirit anyway. But Shake, I glad you come back to us for good. No, I can't go so far, sir. I really can't stop. Have to go around by American fashions. Must buy a black shoe for this evening. But Shake, it's a pity you wasn't here for your mother's funeral. I really feel for you. You are all the way over there in Italy and your mother passing away. Let me tell you about it, Shakes boy. I was small, but I was there. One hell of a, excuse me, torn out, you hear? And you know, only 2 years and 2 months before I had this dream, clear as daylight. I was going down American fashions to buy a party dress, you know? Something stylish, like what everybody wearing now. But I was the first to lead off with those new styles. Something to match this coconut shell brooch my boyfriend sent me from Toronto. And and just as I get by the door, a mind tell me, girl, buy a black dress. Just so, as God above me. Excuse me using password. Glasses? No, I never had all those background with high school and so forth. Uh-huh. Oh, oh, is my sister Avril you taking me for all this time? She had glasses, but she gone a long time. I see you still have Avril on your mind then. Eh, Shaky? But you don't remember when you and Avril used to walk out, I was hardly off the tip of my father's tongue? Anyway, you know something? You look just the same age as me. It's a funny thing. Must be the cold over there. Or must be all them Swedish girls. But I still bet it don't have anything over there too much St. Vincent girls for looks and walks and thing. Yes, sir? Watch Flora now. Stiff backside. Excuse me. Flora for took you over the road then now. Watch how she peering you and I telling you, Shake Keane, people in St. Vincent not nice again like long time now. A person can have a respectable chat with an old friend before the whole country don't know before the clock strike not. It's a good thing you come to bring us some culture, you hear? I was only small, but my mother used to tell me how your father bring up his whole family with culture. How the whole family used to walk in that Presbyterian church as soon as the last bell stopped. Punctual no hell. The government giving you a car to do this culture job properly? That's the end.
Thank you, Lafleur. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that reading. And I'd just like to read one last piece, which is the poem that I was talking to Linton about, called Credential. Shake's poetry, like his music, ranges from mellowness to humor and anger. And early we heard some of the mellowness in the poem Angel Horn. Credential sketches briefly Shake's life history and is told with his trademark humor, but with touches of anger and sarcasm. It goes like this. Credential. 6-year-old, and my father give me a trumpet, and he show me how to blow it, how to polish it, how to respect it. And he say, exercise your potential. Hold on to this. But the neighbor them say, boy, where your manners? Where your wool tie? Where your hymn book and your cork hat? You mean your father didn't give you that? So I try out my credential. I take it out and I polish it. And they like it. And I say, my father didn't give me that, but he gave me this. 18-year-old and my girlfriend vexed with me trumpet. She say, boy, where your money? Where your hot pants? Where your whiskey and your shirt jack and your Fiat? That is essential, otherwise you're gonna miss me, sweetheart. So I roll up my credential, weary polish it. Then I blow it and she like it. And I say, my father didn't give me that, but he gave me this. 25-year-old, and I hit the mother country and I show them all my manners and my certificates. But they trouble me. They say, boy, where your history, where your culture, where your father, where your money, where your hot shirt, where your felt hat? I say, no profit, no potential in this. So I take out my essential and I polish it. And they respect it. And so they respect it, so I blow it. And I say, is my father will give me that and will give me this. 40-year-old and I touch back down upon my country. And I like it and I cool it. And I bring back all my father trumpet give them. But the sweet fool them say, boy, what you come home for? Where your big car? Where your wool hat? Where your snap soul and your whiskey and your cantankerousness? Are we culture? Are we potential? Is definitely non-residential. All this trumpet is a famous load of piss. Hold on to this. So I heist up my credential. Same one where my father show. How to polish, how to respect, how to blow. And I say to them, fee off. So we've come to the end of the chats and the readings, and I must say thank you to everybody who has turned up this morning, afternoon, evening, night. I know some people had to get up very early for this. So I'm very grateful. Some may have gone to bed by now. But it's now time for a few questions. And I think Corinne has been collecting them. And I will try and answer those that he has. And also, there's time for a few comments using the Zoom icons. So shall we start with those questions, Corinne?
So the first question that I saw was from Nancy, who asked about you to talk about the sound of his poetry. I don't know if Nancy's still here and wants to expand on that.
Yes, yes, I'm still here. And I just wanted to understand how sound might have guided his poetry, because that's such a strong sensibility in him. Yeah, that's basically what my question is. Thank you.
Well, as I said earlier, that he, in terms, I mean, I can see how you would raise the question, because, you know, somebody who is intimately involved in music is involved, obviously, in sound all the time. But there is this debate. I mean, he actually said that he kept the two separate, the poetry and the music. So if you like, but I mean, I actually disagree, because I could see there's overlap in different kinds of ways. I would say the sound is actually in terms of sound, it's an intimacy with a particular Caribbean dialect, which is the Vincentian dialect, which, you know, I mean, he had grown up with and was very much part of him. And so I would say, in terms of writing it, he captured that sound of the island very, very clearly, and did that throughout his life in a whole range of the poems that he wrote.
Thank you.
Corinne, next.
Roger Cotterill had a question. Roger, do you want to put your microphone on?
Oh, can you hear me? Thank you very much.
Yes, we can.
Okay. I just wanted to make a brief comment, because I had the great honor of helping Coleridge Good to write his autobiography. And Coleridge always said that Shake Keane was his best friend in all the world. They played together, of course, for for many years in Joe Harriot's quintet. And I think in personality terms, Joe was so different from Shake that Coleridge got on extremely well with Shake Keane and really only related to Joe Harriot as a musician. But I think I could just mention that for some years, Shake Keane and his wife Christiane actually lived in Coleridge and Gertrude's house there, and Coleridge used to tell me about Shake in the neighborhood there. I think Philip mentioned that Shake was a Guinness drinker. I never met Shake, but Coleridge told me that he was a great brandy drinker eventually. And one little interesting thing is that you can actually hear Shake's brandy glass on one of the records of the Joe Harriot Quintet, because there's a famous, when they're recording free form music, using Joe's themes, compositions, at the end of a recording session, they decided to just keep playing for some reason. I think Pat Smythe, the pianist, started playing, and then Coleridge joined in with the bass, and then Shake heard what was happening and started to tap his brandy glass, which he was carrying. He was drinking brandy at the time. And the sound of the brandy glass just fitted with the sound of the piano. And then Joe Harriot came down the stairs in the recording studio and started playing as well. And what they recorded is one of the best and most famous recordings of the Joe Harriot Quintet. It's called Modal, and it's on the Abstract album. And what gets it started is the sound of Shake's brandy glass with him tapping a pencil on it.
Yes, that's, and thank you also for mentioning Coleridge. Coleridge was obviously extremely important to Shake. Put a roof over his head, helped him convert to playing the flugelhorn. He was, and although as you say, they were very different characters, they were obviously very close. And in fact, the last poem he wrote, Angel Horn, was dedicated both to Eric Bye and to Coleridge Good. So yes, thank you for mentioning it. Coleridge was a very, very important, had played a very important role, I'd say in Shake's life, especially in those UK days. Corinne?
So we have a question from Cleve Scott. Can you comment on what Shake symbolizes for St. Vincent then and now?
That's a very difficult question, Cleve. Thanks. I would say there is an element of kind of contradiction and contrariness in terms. I mean, a lot of St. Vincent is very appreciative of what he did. You know, in a sense, he put the place on the map. I mean, we are really, St. Vincentians are really known more for growing marijuana and ground provisions rather than for fine art. And so Shake, you know, kind of broke through all that and demonstrated, in a sense, you know, what could come out of a small place, if you like. And so from that point of view, I think he's, you know, for Vincentian, for people from the island, there is a sense of pride in that. But at the same time, you know, I think that there was a total separation gap when he came back, and in terms of how he was expected. And I think that poem, Credential, what was expected of him, and how people saw him, and that poem of his, Credential, kind of illustrates very much that gap, that divide. And he has certainly been taken up more now. You know, there's been a bust which was created of him, which is somewhere in the Peace Memorial Hall in Kingstown. And a lot of people, you know, now with the international acclaim, have sort of flocked to the positive side of associating with him. But I would say the attitude has changed over the years. and obviously in a sense has mellowed. So Corin, next.
So Hendrika has a question. Can you comment on, is it Kaiso? Kaiso? Does Keane play with being Trinidadian here?
Well, I mean, I would say that he's played with a lot of Calypsonians. And in fact, when he was, my understanding is when he was living in New York, one of his roles was to arrange for music, when the music that was being played for Calypso singers there. So I would say that he's always had an association, and certainly in the early days when he was, before he left St. Vincent, you know, he was playing in bands there, and he would have been playing a whole range of Calypso music. So yes. Next.
So I think there's just one comment in the chat from Molten Keane that is nice. It says, "Thank you, Philip. That poem is one that inspired me as I pursued my chosen career. It does not matter what others think or expect of you. It is more important to choose your niche and go after it with your all."
Yep.
And then Robert Lee, who said, "Gene Lawrence, a Caribbean musician who played with Shakers here. Your cousin." Would he say something? I don't know if Gene is here and can hear us.
Yes, I can hear you. Yes. I've been following you quite closely. I'm enjoying the whole thing. Well, I could tell you something about Shake that certainly when I was in the height of my musical performances, I was engaged to go to St. Vincent from Trinidad. I brought a Trinidad group with me, and we stayed at Philip's parents' home. At least I did, and the rest of them stayed next to this place called the Villa Aquatic Club. A fellow called Mr. Stilly Fraser owned the club, and I was employed to do a weekend of music there. We got a lot of nice publicity from the press, you know, Son of the Soil coming back to perform, and we were having a lovely evening. The club was filled, and who walked in but Shake Keane. I hadn't seen him since London when I was there in the 60s, and this was somewhere in the middle 70s, I would think. Then I went to St. Vincent. So he had the trumpet with him, which I was a little bit in awe of, because I didn't know if our group was capable of doing anything with him. Anyway, the long and short of it is, he did come on the stage and we had a chat, and he said, look, Gene, I want to play a piece. I said, yes, what are you going to choose? Of course, I was absolutely petrified of the song he might select, knowing the versatility and the difficult pieces I've heard him execute in London, you know. Anyway, thank God, he said, well, I'd like to play Moonlight in Vermont. Well, it was such a relief, because myself and the keyboard player, a fellow called Robert Bailey, were quite conversant with this piece. And so we were relieved that we were able to give him a proper backing. And yeah, it came off very well. And then, you know, we just ad-libbed and played a lot of our Calypso stuff with us after, and a lot of Latin stuff that we used to do in those days. So that was, you know, how, about the last time I really met Shake properly. Before he went to New York and all that sort of thing. You know, but I will tell you, my first introduction to Shake was at the grammar school, because he was our literature teacher at the grammar school in St. Vincent when I was a boy. So I knew him from way back. Yeah, but he has always been a person who has always had a lot to offer, you know. So I'm glad to see that all of this is being done for him, and the book was.
Okay, Corinne, I think it's about time we wrapped up, unless there's any really burning questions or issues. Perhaps we can wrap up and encourage people to buy the book, which is part of the exercise. And we will show where it will be available and in what ways, I think.
Of course, so the book is available by the link in the chat. And we're just going to, I don't think we have any more questions. So we're just going to close with Prague 89.
Yeah, this is a track from Real Keen Reggae into Jazz from the LKJ records, and it's called Prague 89, in which it features Shake Keane.